So, hi everyone, can you hear me? Yes, you can. So I always feel like a cyborg with this kind of thing. It's so weird. But I'm really happy to be here in Israel for the first time. So it's really, really exciting for me. Oh. So we don't have that much time, so we actually get started. This is going to be quite fun for me, not for you, because I have some challenges and I have some rewards for those of you who are going to solve the challenge. Yes, so you have to work hard. We have like 45 minutes, so we're going to have maybe 15 challenges or so, and they're not like as easy as you think. This is not going to be easy. This is going to be fun. So let's just start. This is going to be dirty. And when I talk dirty, I need to get an acceptance from you that you are okay with getting your hands dirty when it comes to front end. So the problem is that some of the things you're going to see today you will not be able to unsee. And I don't take any credit or responsibility for what happens next. All right? So with this in mind, let's get rocking. So, come on. Yes. No, doesn't matter. Okay. So this is fun. All right, so let's just get started, right? So first of all, how many of you would consider themselves to be a good, very good front-end developer? And good and humble front-end developer? Okay, not that many. That's interesting. All right. So let's bring it on, right? So let's say you have a problem, right? So a client comes to you, and of course they have to, they want you to have it solved by yesterday, so you don't have much time to experiment. So what do you need to do? Well, what if you want to nest one link inside another link? For example, in side notes, footnotes, or articles, when you want the entire excerpt to be linked, but the excerpt could potentially contain links which also should stay links. Think about a sidebar, right? When in a sidebar you have a block element which is supposed to be a link, but inside of that link element you are supposed to have a link as well, right? Like if you're pulling excerpts of news from different channels and you want to pull them on a page, right? You want the links inside of links. Now, can you do it with HTML? No, no position absolute. No, well, first of all, as Christian said, this is not a good idea to have it, but if you have to do it, maybe you have to find a workaround to make it work. Now, please don't position absolute, because what do you do if you want it to be responsive? You have to do some JavaScript trickery to make it all work. Is there any way to make it in a dirty way, but in a convenient, dirty way? That index, no, not necessarily. I mean, you can, of course, position, but this is, you know, there is one element which is horrible, and I love it because it's so horrible. It's the object tag. Now, this is what we want, right, just to explain. So we have a few excerpts from different websites, let's say, and want this entire thing to be a link, but we also want this link, the internal link, to stay a link as well. Now, the problem is, if you don't try to embed a link, of course, it's not going to work. Because the thing what's going to happen is, well, the browser, when you write markup like this, right, when you nest a link inside of another link, what browsers will assume, well, correctly, that you're stupid and you forgot to close the first one, so they're going to close the first one for you, and they're going to open the second, but they're not going to reopen the first one, which makes perfect sense. However, this is what you're going to end up with the rest of the link not being, or paragraph not being a link anymore. Unless you put the link inside of the object tag. I know, yes, I felt the same way the first time as well. But in one of the projects that one of my colleagues was working on, they had to build in a weird jQuery plugin that would do all kind of crazy stuff. If you have to do something like this, well, maybe you could potentially look into this, right? But it would do exactly what it does. Why? Well, because object behaves very much like the iframe or SVG. It kind of exists outside of the scope of the document, so browser isn't even going to touch it, which is a good thing. And if you absolutely have to make it work in IE 8 and 7 and 6, just in case, this is probably the most horrible thing I ever said in my life, you have to plug in conditional comments inside object. Don't do this, please. But you can, right? Here's a nice article about this, and if you just don't hate the entire technique, you can actually look at kittens. They're pretty nice too, all right? But that's okay, this is not the worst. Okay, here's another one. Broken images. Now, nobody likes broken images, right? They look horrible, they look pretty unspectacular. Is there any way to change the styling if images are actually broken, but not if they're not broken? On what? On arrow? No, 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 no. In a nice, simple CSS way. There are many different ideas I can see. Well, it's very difficult for me to say. I'm just going to throw it, all right? It's chocolate, so that's OK, all right? So yes, there is a way to do it. Well, as it appears, the image element is a replaced element. This is an element whose appearance and dimensions are defined by an external resource. So pseudo-elements typically shouldn't work with it unless the image is broken. So if the image is broken, you can totally apply pseudo before and after pseudo-elements in order to actually make it work. So you can actually add some text before or after it, or you can style the entire thing, you can add some background to it, you can add icons to it, and so on and so forth, just by adding before and after on image, and it's going to be applied only if image is broken. So you can, improve it right away. Easy peasy, right? That's pretty cool. And it's actually well supported, except for in Opera Mini, Safari, and iOS WebView, but I think it's going to be supported in Safari 10. So that's cool. All right, if you want to read more about this, here you go. All right? How are we doing so far? That's going to be more interesting now. So here is an interesting problem that you'll probably encounter a lot of times. So you want to achieve fluid typography, right? But you don't want to just use VH on the calc. Of course you can. I mean, maybe some of you have tried. You just write calc, like font size, calc, I don't know, minimum font size plus 1 VW, or plus 2 VH, or something like this, right? Or Vmin, right? It doesn't matter. Well, yeah, but then you have a linear growth, and sometimes you don't want linear growth. You actually want to have a nice modular scale. Because what if we can get this perfectly fluid type with something like this, right? Font size calc 1 EM plus 1 VW, where 1 EM is going to be our minimum font size, but this is not nice because the actual font size is going to be 1 EM, in the smallest use case. And it's going to grow infinitely, which is probably not what we want. So maybe we can actually improve it a little bit. I mean, this is what we're going to end up with if we just have this calc function with font size calc 1 pixel plus, or like 4 VW and 4 VH in calc. That makes sense. That's nice, it's beautiful, it's scalable, right? But that's not quite what we want. Because if we tend to use modular scale, like minor second or major second or the major third, something like this, which is actually very common in design, right? If we wanted to choose a font size of 16 pixels at a screen resolution of 400 pixels, and then transition to 24 pixel at 800, we couldn't do it without the breakpoint. Unless we use this formula. Okay? Now this, I know, that sounds scary, right? And it sounds weird, but imagine the following situation. You want to transition from 16 pixels to 24 pixels between these breakpoints, right? You just plug it in the formula, where here you've got the minimum 16 pixels. Of course, it should be amps, but just for brevity here, 16 pixels plus the difference between the two times 100 VW minus minimal screen size divided by maximum screen size minus minimal screen size. It actually works like charm. It really does. You just have to come up with this at once. But then it really works. And in the end, you end up with something like this, where the headings and the typography is going to scale not just a linear fashion, but actually according to the scale, right? So what do? Well, you choose your font sizes, you choose your headings, you choose your paragraph sizes, and so on and so forth, and you just plug in formula for every single one of them once, and you don't need to add media queries at all. Actually, that's pretty cool, I would say. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, we actually published an article about this, which you can read as well, which is pretty nice. And the only thing you need to make it work is calc, and calc is supported everywhere except you know who, but this is not a problem, right? Well, Opera Mini is a problem, right, but not a problem, hopefully. Okay, here's another one. So how do you make sure that in a multi-column table, both a row and a column are highlighted on hover and on tab? Now, highlighting current row is not a problem, but what about a column? right? This is what you want. You have a table, you tap on one of the cells, you want both the column and the row to be highlighted without JavaScript. Call group, all right, anything else? Now there is one thing that works like charm all the time. I can't see anybody, so I'm just going to throw, all right? So one thing that works really well all the time, and I really love it, which is, of course, pseudo-elements. And what? Yes, but then you need to know exactly what cell you're talking about, right? We don't have the parent selector in CSS, so we can't go up, right? But what we can do is say, all right, here's a little trick. We're going to create a huge pseudo-element to cover the entire thing, and we're going to put it on TDs with a negative top value of half of that value. You will see in a second why. Then we hide these pseudo-elements with overflow hidden, so the table actually stays a table. And we use negative Z index to put the content up front so we can copy-paste it, and then, of course, we can make all cells focusable and focus them on touch start. So this is what's going to happen. So now, first time I saw this in my life, I freaked out, literally, because I didn't know that I could do this, right? But you can actually put a pseudo-class and a pseudo-element, or pseudo-element and a pseudo-class, and it actually works really well. So here's what we do. We put overflow hidden on the entire table. Then we're putting, obviously, we can use tr hover on a row. And then also for TDs, we're going to create this huge pseudo-element, and it's going to have a height of 10,000 pixels, and because we don't know the actual height of the table, so we're going to center it to put it in the middle with top minus 5,000 pixels. The width is clear, it's predictable, so it's 100%. And then we're using background color, current color, just because we can. And then we're putting Z index -1, so we can copy-paste the entire thing, and it's done. So let's take the next one. And of course, we can do it for TH as well. But call group might work too, of course. All right? Now, here is a tricky one. Gmail and responsive emails and media queries. That's a lot of fun. Now, Gmail doesn't support media queries, and that's a real problem for those of you who have to build responsive email layouts. We have to do it, and when I'm running consultancy, I'm kind of talking to companies that have to do it every single day. And you know, email designers are really, or email developers are really creative people, and they're poor souls, if you ask me. So, is there anybody in the room who is, who's building responsive emails a lot? Can you come later so we can all hug you? That's really so sad. That's so sad. Because you have to suffer so much that hurts. So what can we do? Now, when we're talking about email, it feels like going back in time in front end, which is really, really disgusting in many ways. Because we have to deal with this kind of thing, most of the time still. Like many emails that are being sent out today are still not responsive at all, because making them responsive is really, really hard. So the email developers come up with all kinds of crazy techniques. I'm not very proud of what I'm going to say next. But I have to share something very personal. So I was working with this guy in a company where it was really important for them to send out emails with buttons as images, which is a bad idea in the first place. But this was CMS, and they had to make it work. And this poor guy tried to figure out the solution to make it work for many, many, many weeks. And he just couldn't figure it out. Because obviously, the problem you have with email, images are not displayed by default. JavaScript support is, well, non-existent. CSS support is, not so good. So at least in many clients out there. So what do? Well, he figured out a way. So he built a little tool which would convert a button image into a table HTML markup where 1 pixel in an image would be 1 times 1 TD cell. And if you wrap a link around it, it works like charm in Outlook. I don't know why. It's so bad. But this does work, right? And also, one thing that you have to do sometimes, if you're using a table, which is, of course, what you will be using in this time, well, you can actually color background cells in the table and use alt text to so the entire thing appears as if it was a button, like register now in here. This is the life that email developers lead, so pay attention to them, right? They are really poor souls. Now, The problem is, I mean, we can do some really dirty things, right? So if we have a table like this, we can use table properties, display table, display block property, display block the table cell in order to actually stack things, for example, right? There are a few things we can use, but the problem is actually Gmail, right? Oh, just have to run quickly here. Yes, come on. The problem is Gmail. And the problem is, so what if you want to make it responsive in Gmail? You can't use media queries because Gmail doesn't support media queries, but let's say you want to go from 4 columns to 2, or maybe you want to simplify from 2 columns to 1. Well, there is a really weird combination of calc width, min width, and max width that allows you to mimic responsive email in Gmail. Okay, so here's how it goes. Here's a question for you. If you have a box and you define the width and min width and max width on it, with width being 320 pixels, min width 480 pixels. Somebody really didn't like this idea. I guess that. Okay, again, width 320, min width 480, max width 160. What is going to win? Who thinks that width is going to win? Who think that min width is going to win? Who think that max width is going to win? Well, the answer is, it depends. Because if the width value is greater than the max width value, max width wins. Now that we understand, right? In general, I mean, not in this specific case, but in general. So if the width is bigger than max width, then max width wins, because we're kind of limiting the width, right? However, if the min width value is greater than the width or max width, then min width wins. You have to read it again. If the min width value is greater than the width or max width, then min width wins. You will find out in a second why it makes sense. So here's how we can do it, right? So we have this box. We define the min width being 50%, max width being 100%, and the width being calculated from 480 pixels minus 100% times 480. That's okay. That's okay, don't worry, this is going to be fine. I promise. So what the hell is going on here? Let's say we have a breakpoint at 480 pixels, right? So 480 pixels is our breakpoint. 100% is the width of the parent element, right? In our case, well, this is obvious. Our goal is always to create a value bigger than our max width or smaller than our min width, so that either one of those properties is applied instead of width. Again, our goal is to create a value bigger than our max width or smaller than our min width, so that either one of those properties is applied instead. Now we can abuse it in many different ways. Now one of them is this one. So what if you have a min width defined as 50%, max width defined 100%, and width defined as calc of 480 pixels, which is our breakpoint, minus 100% times 480. Okay? So in that case, the width is going to be minus 9,600 pixels, the max width 500 pixels, and min width 250 pixels, and in that case, 250 pixels is going to win. If the parent is 500 pixels above our breakpoint. If we are under our breakpoint, so we have, let's say, 400 pixels, in that case, the min width is 200 pixels, max width is 400 pixels, and width is 38,400 pixels, which means that max width is going to win. In this way, we can mimic responsive media queries in Gmail. That's not, no. I mean, this is horrible. If you can avoid something like this, please do. But if you, I mean, I'm a pragmatic person, right? So if somebody comes to you, right, and it's your job on the line, and you have to build something that works today because somebody really depends on it, well, maybe you have to do it, right? You can't just say, I'm going to walk home, because I have a family to work for, right? So please don't use it if you can, but it's important to know that this works. All right? I mean, you can do a lot of crazy stuff in email. How would you actually create an interactive feed in your email? Let's assume you're getting an email that looks like this, right? So you actually open it in your email client, and this is what it looks like a live Twitter feed. Now, there is no JavaScript support in Gmail, email. I mean, in Gmail for sure, right? But not in email. How would you make it work? iframe. Yes, so what you could do, what they at least did, oh, actually, Christian is getting a little thing here. Here we go. Yes, so what they actually did here, so they're basically referencing an external image that is being updated and pinged every 2 seconds. And then they're cropping this image, and they're using animations to actually move the thing so it appears like it's a live tweet. But it's actually almost a live tweet because they're actually referencing an external image, which is updated permanently, right? So don't do this if you can, but this is fun to know as well. Okay? Now there are also other things that you can use, right? One of them is, for example, 2 resources which I really like because they're very helpful for responsive email designers. It's like responsive email patterns and responsive email resources.com. Which contain all kind of dirty techniques and patterns you can use, and tools you can use as well to make it work. And the technique was discovered by Remy Parmentier. Thank you, Remy. All right, here's another one. Now, you want to add a background to inline text for headings, but the text should be padded along both the left and right edge of each line. Now, the left and right padding will only apply to the very first and very last line. This is a problem, right? So you won't say you want to have a feature image somewhere in a newspaper article, somewhere in the top, like a hero image, and you want at the bottom left to have like a little background area which contains, text. But this text might be padded because you don't know because it's responsive. So this text might be breaking to the next line. So if you just add padding, this is what you're going to end up with. You have a padding here, you have a padding here, but no padding in here and not in here. Text indent. That's, who said box shadow? Up here. Oh. I'm sorry. Okay, you can come later, I have more. All right, so in fact, this is what actually works best. You just add it on both sides and that's it, right? I mean, once you know it, it's like, blah, easy, obvious. But if you don't know it, it might take some time to figure it out, right? Now, there is also a new declaration coming up, the box declaration break, which will help us to do exactly this, but we're not quite there yet. But we will be, right? It's going to take a little bit in Edge, I think, only. Christian? Do you want another one? No, all right. Christian doesn't respond to me anymore. That's okay. Okay, here's another problem. Images. Now, we know that images are not blocking rendering, right? This is a good thing. However, the problem is that sometimes we want images to render really, 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 really fast. For example, if you have a landing page, you really want your product image to appear as fast as possible, right? You don't want to wait at all. So is there any way to optimize images beyond the traditional, the good old image optimization, right? Well, yes. One of them is, well, you can use some tricks. What compresses really well, for example, is blurriness, right? So here we've got the photo, and it has 1,600 pixels in width, right? Which makes like an unoptimized 970 kilobyte. Now, that's a lot. Now, we can use quality 60 to bring the size down to 213 kilobyte. That's pretty good. But then if we compare this image to this image, the difference is 80 kilobyte or 70 kilobyte. Did you spot the difference? The only thing that we changed is blurriness around this photo, around this picture, right? But it actually helps us bring down the photo to another 60 or 70 kilobyte, which is really cool, right? However, we can do more than this. Now, we have 2 kinds of JPEGs on the web, and I'm talking about JPEGs because we can primarily apply these techniques to JPEGs. So we have sequential or baseline JPEG, when you actually go to when you want to see an image, and the image actually just loads from top to bottom, done, right? And also we have progressive JPEGs, where the image is appearing fast in a bad quality, and then the quality gets better over time, right? Now, progressive JPEGs are better because we can actually show something faster. That's good, but it depends also on how we are going to encode the progressive JPEG. Because the way it renders is in a series of scans. So you have the first scan, second scan, and so on, because some part of the images are, or different kind of scans are encoded in the JPEG. So we can have different scans, and usually you have 10 scan levels, right? Now, we can manipulate the way we actually do the scanning. Now, this is a regular one which is used in most encoders. And you can play with brightness, luminescence, and so on and so forth to actually improve it a little bit. But in the end, what you want is, in the first scan layer already, you want to provide something that is OK. It's not going to be great, of course, but you want to have something that is shipping fast and actually looks okay, shows fast. Now, as it appears, if you're crazy enough to run a lot of experiments and try to figure out when you get the best compression with the best quality, you might want to manipulate when and how scan levels actually take place in your encoding. So even on the first image, already in the first scan, you might be getting an okay result, which of course then gets better and better and better. It depends if you can actually see it or not. It's all the fine color details, of course, for every pixels. But this one is going to be blurrier, a bit blurrier than the last ones, right? But as it turns out, what you can do, in fact, is really manipulate the way each scan level works, and then you can end up with a better speed index just by doing this alone. So you can actually reduce not necessarily the file size might be a bit bigger, but you might actually see something much, much faster. And if you want to do this or experiment with this, you can actually use the adapt JPEG compressor, or if you want to encode, like compress JPEGs in the best way possible today, at least, you could be using MOS JPEG, right? Which is really, really cool. So if you want to compress JPEGs, this is probably the best you can do today. But of course, you can do more than this, because you can use things like preload and prefetch. Right? So with preload, for example, you can go ahead and say, OK, I need this image to be appearing fast. Now, preload can be compared to prefetch or DNS prefetch that you might know, like resource hints. The main difference is that with prefetch or preload, you actually say that this is important. You want it to load fast, right? While with prefetch, it's going to be deprioritized. It's going to be put in the cache, but it's not going to have a high priority. With preload, you're actually saying, yes, this is important. We actually have an article discovering different use cases where you can actually go ahead and use it today, right? And with preload, the good thing is, again, that you can define priority. You can say that something is important, right? You can also say that this is a resource that might be discovered late. For example, if you have a CSS or JavaScript file which references a certain file, something that you probably will need, well, the browser will actually need some time to actually find it. So you can actually give a heads up and say, hey, you will need it right away, or soon, right? Or you can do the same thing for fonts. With fonts, you can say, well, I'm going to need the font, and you actually have to put in the cross-origin attribute here as well, right? And even better than this, we can also run dynamic loading without execution. Think about actually getting some JavaScript, but not executing before you actually need it, right? So this could be quite helpful as well. Now, this is not well supported yet, but we will be getting there, of course. And it's, again, if you think about progressive enhancement or like just improving the perceived performance, well, there is no downside of using it, right? It's just everybody will benefit from it. But there are other things, other resource hints, which are actually available today and really, really useful, like DNS prefetch, where if you're loading any resources from third party or CDN, you can actually give a little head start to the browser to say, hey, I will need resources from this domain. So please initiate the connection and keep it alive or keep it active. With prefetch, you can even prefetch resources and put them in the cache. And even better, you can use pre-render. And you can use pre-render for many, many different reasons. For example, think about having a landing page with a button saying add to the cart, right? Now, you can actually pre-render the entire page that would be appearing in the browser once the user clicks on that button. Now, you have to be careful, because you basically might be potentially wasting users' resources and users' bandwidth. At this point, you have to be really careful. You might not want to render the entire thing, but you might want to actually prefetch some of the JavaScript or some of the stuff that are going to be appearing on that other next page. And you can always try to be one step ahead of the time, right? So when a user actually clicks that button, the image appears, or the page appears right away. While the user is interacting with this page, you can preload and prefetch things for the next one, and so on and so forth, kind of being one step ahead of time all the time, right? Another thing that you can do, and we actually mentioned, Chris mentioned it today as well, I'm forgetting throwing them. Here we go. One thing you can also do is use this really great tool, responsive image breakpoint generator, in order to reduce the payload, right? Where you can define certain settings from resolution to size step. You can also define how many images you would like to have, even things like different ratios and so on. And it's going to output all the different images, and it's going to output the markup that you can use right away, and also in different aspect ratios if you need to do it. Right? And you can then download images and preview the entire thing and how responsive it's going to be right there. Now, it doesn't get better than this. That's really, really cool, right? OK, here's the next one. No excitement anymore. That's okay. One person in the room, all right. Okay, so here's another thing, tables. Now, by default, tables are quite unpredictable and spongy, and if you don't know how lengthy the content inside cells will be, some columns can be unpredictably wide, destroying the layout, right? For example, like this, where you don't have real control about how tall, how wide some of the cells are going to be. Is there any way to make it fixed? Because if you just use default behavior in browsers, that might be a bit weird and unpredictable. Overflow, there's all kind of things coming up. Okay, I really can't hear anybody. All right. Somebody said table layout fixed, so that's pretty cool. Well, if you're using table layout fixed, this is really, really useful because you can say, now with table layout fixed, the layout is fixed based on the first row. So if I set the width on those cells in the first row, the rest is going to be the same, the rest is going to follow. So what's happening here, well, if you're just putting the width on each of these cells in the top, with table layout fixed on the table, it's going to follow, no matter what, which is also quite useful. What if you have to translate an interface into many languages? The length of words is unpredictable. How do you manage it across devices and across browsers? You don't want this, right? I hope not. Is somebody brave enough to pronounce it, to read it out loudly? Wow, very impressive. It's okay. Yeah, so it's Rindfleischetikettierungsüberwachungsaufgabensübertragungsgesetz, right? So which is an actual word in German language which stands for the law for the delegation of monitoring beef labeling, which actually does exist. But this is not our concern at this point. Our concern is this at this point, right? Because what we definitely would love to have is, you know, something like this with a nice hyphenation. However, in most browsers, if hyphenation is supported at all with hyphens auto, the dictionary is not going to be German, it's going to be English most of the time. And I don't think there's any browser actually has a German dictionary available as well. So the hyphenation is going to be wrong. Now, this is not what we want. This is probably the best we can get, right? And this is probably the easiest, but the most useless thing we can do, right? Because at this point, I mean, it's not really helpful, right? So, of course, the guy from Germany decided to figure it out because, you know, German language. So he decided to really test all kind of properties that existed that would actually help him fix it. Word break and overflow wrap. And this is actually the final solution that works across most devices, most browsers, where you combine overflow wrap break word and word wrap break word and hyphens potentially, if it's English, to make it all work, right? So HTTP cache. Now, HTTP cache is kind of a problem because HTTP cache works according to the POP principle. So how many pages do you visit a day? Probably not 5, more like 50, maybe even 100. So of course, the cache is limited. So every single time something is added to the cache, something is probably going to be removed from the cache. Which is why, for example, if you're putting fonts in the cache, well, users might see this flicker between fonts every 2 or 3 weeks, depending on how active they are on the internet, right? So is there any way to improve it? And of course, yes. And of course, the answer is, well, what? IndexedDB or service workers. So service workers, why is it important? Now, we tend to, when we're talking about designing today, like building responsive sites today, or designing responsive websites today, we kind of tend to talk about ideal state most of the time. We're designing still something that works fine in the browser. However, of course, the stack is very different. Now, we actually also have the blank state, the loading state, the partial state, and the error state as well, right? And we have to design them as well. And what's interesting is that the landscape has been changing. So right now, the blank state doesn't have to be blank, doesn't have to be empty. Because we could be using offline technologies like service workers to deliver something even if user is offline, right? We can also make it work better with loading state, because loading state is usually not empty anymore, right? Because we tend to use skeleton screens. If you go on Facebook, you will be seeing the layout, like the skeleton of the page before the content gets populated in the layout, right? So you see something, and this is great for perceived performance. Partial state doesn't have to be broken, because if we are using progressive enhancement, then we actually can make sure that users can access content even if something is broken or JavaScript hasn't loaded yet, right? And error state, yes, we have to make sure it actually works if there are errors. And finally, ideal state is hopefully something that most users will see. Now, the best way to actually make it work today is by using service workers. And service workers is this new technology, well, relatively new technology, which enables us to deliver assets much, much faster. And it's basically nothing else than a background process running JavaScript. But it behaves like a proxy server on the user's device. And the way it works is, well, quite simple. I don't have that much time to explain it, but the slides will be available anyway. But the idea is very simple. You just register a service worker once, it gets activated, and then it kind of leaves on user's machine. And then it can intercept all network traffic between the site and the outside world, right? So that for every network request that comes in, you as a developer can decide what's going to happen. Should the users fetch resources from the cache, or should you fetch resources from network, or at least try, and if it fails, then fetch resources from the cache and display it. So we've been experimenting with it a lot over the last 2 months. And we actually were able to pull it off and launch it last week. So this is what it looks like. So let's assume we're going to Smash and Mac incognito mode with an OK connection, right? So you're going to be loading a lot of stuff. As you can see, there is a lot going on. I mean, we have in total, on the first slot, very first slot, a lot of requests. We have 160, which is way too much. But you will see in a second why it's so many, right? So at this point, we are loading a lot of stuff that will be stored in service workers, so all subsequent visits are going to be faster. So if you're refreshing now, most of the stuff except the advertising makes up most requests, will be coming from service worker within milliseconds. And I'm not talking about hundreds of milliseconds, rather like 20 milliseconds or so. So most resources will be coming from the cache right away. And the start render time will be around, I don't know, 500, 700 milliseconds. So if you're turning off Wi-Fi, and if I'm offline at this point, I can still access the content, right? I can even go to the first 5 articles and read them offline. Some people are actually confused and really don't understand what the hell is going on. And also you can read the latest email newsletter and job openings and printed books and something like this, right? So you can actually provide some really nice offline experience. So even if you're offline, you're still able to access everything really fast. And to be honest, faster than online, because online we're loading ads as well, right? So feel free to go once, go offline, and then you'll be able to read the last 5 articles that you recently opened, right? And it took a little bit of time to develop, but in the end, it wasn't really a big deal, right? And it actually works really, really well. And most of the stuff is actually coming from service workers. So if we didn't have the ad scripts running, the delivery of the page would be approximately 80 milliseconds on subsequent visits. Told you, I fully agree, right? So like 80 milliseconds, which is kind of a big deal. So you can play with service workers today as well. And there are good articles and tutorials you can use. I know that I'm finished. And also, there are really nice tools coming up now. So for example, there's service worker precache, which is a node module to generate service workers code for you to precache specific resources. Also like a nice toolbox of service workers tools that you can use, techniques, and the service workers cookbook, which contains all kinds of recipes and ready-to-use code snippets you can use to put things in the cache and use it later, which is really, really great, right? So there is literally no reason not to use it, because many browsers today, well, many, Firefox and Chrome are actually using it already. So it works pretty well. So I have a summary slide. OK, well, which contains the stuff that I kind of covered, at least partly, so you can check it a bit later, maybe. I will actually put the slides so you can see them later. And if you want to have more stuff here, I've got like 20 or so that you can pick up. So with this in mind, thank you so much for being here.